Natasha stepped out of the cab and looked up at the sprawling estate that had loomed in her imagination ever since she was a child. The gates alone were taller than the apartment building she'd grown up in, wrought iron curling in intricate patterns that spoke of generations of wealth and power. She felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach, a mixture of anticipation and unease. Thanksgiving had always been a family affair, but this year was different. Her grandfather, Victor Sterling, a man whose name alone could make the stock market shiver, had summoned her personally to the estate, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind the invitation than turkey and pumpkin pie. She took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of her purse, and stepped through the gates. The gravel crunched under her heels as she approached the grand entrance, a mansion that could easily swallow her entire neighborhood and still have room for a dozen more. The doors opened before she could knock, and a uniformed butler greeted her with a polite nod, ushering her into a foyer where chandeliers sparkled like captured constellations, and the walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors in gilded frames. Natasha felt small, almost insignificant, and yet there was something invigorating about standing in a place that radiated power and history. The aroma of roasted turkey and freshly baked bread wafted through the corridors, drawing her toward the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. The dining room was a spectacle, a long mahogany table set for a feast that seemed more suited to royalty than a family gathering. At the head of the table sat Victor Sterling, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his hair a striking silver that caught the light, and eyes that could simultaneously charm and intimidate with equal force. Natasha's parents stood nearby, smiling nervously, but it was clear she was the focus of Grandpa Victor's attention. He had a presence that dominated a room without even speaking, a gravitational pull that made everyone else orbit around him. Natasha walked toward the table, her heart hammering in her chest. "Grandpa," she said softly, trying to sound composed. He looked up at her, and a slow smile spread across his face, sharp and calculating, yet tinged with warmth. "Natasha," he said, his voice like velvet over steel. "So good to have you here. Sit, eat, enjoy yourself." She lowered herself into the chair, noting the subtle way he watched her every movement, as though measuring her worth in real time. The dinner unfolded with laughter, polite conversation, and the subtle undercurrent of competition that seemed to saturate every Sterling gathering. Cousins compared internships, aunties discussed charity events, uncles boasted about their business dealings, and Natasha felt the familiar knot of inadequacy tightening in her stomach. She had worked hard to get into college, balancing 2 part-time jobs and maintaining grades that kept her scholarship intact, but in this room, it felt as though her achievements were invisible compared to the towering legacy of her family. And then, just as dessert was being served, Grandpa Victor's gaze found her again, and the room seemed to shrink around them. "Natasha," he said, his tone casual but unmistakably pointed. "Glad you're enjoying the college fund." A laugh rippled through the adults at the table, polite, but edged with something sharp. Natasha froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and felt a wave of heat rise to her cheeks. She realized then that this was no compliment. It was a test, a subtle reminder that every advantage she had in life, no matter how hard she had worked, was intertwined with her family's fortune. Her mind raced as she tried to respond. "Thank you, Grandpa," she managed, her voice steady, despite the mix of embarrassment and indignation swirling inside her. Victor's smile lingered, a predatory glint hiding beneath the surface. "You know, Natasha," he continued, leaning back in his chair, "money can open doors, but it doesn't teach resilience. It doesn't teach grit. It doesn't teach how to navigate the world when no one is holding your hand." Natasha swallowed, her pride bristling. She had faced challenges her grandfather could never have imagined, and yet here he was, reducing her sacrifices to a mere transaction, a line item on a ledger. The room buzzed with the tension between them, and for the first time, Natasha felt a fire ignite within her, a determination that went beyond the fear of disappointing him. This was more than family dynamics. This was a call to assert her own worth, to prove that she was more than the money she had been given. The rest of the evening became a blur of conversations she only half heard, laughter that seemed tinged with irony, and the constant awareness of Victor's gaze tracking her. When the meal concluded, he invited her to join him in his study, a sanctuary lined with bookshelves and walls adorned with artifacts from a lifetime of business conquests. She followed, heart pounding, curiosity mingled with trepidation. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar, rich and intoxicating. Victor gestured to a chair opposite his massive desk. "Sit," he commanded softly. Natasha obeyed, and for a long moment there was silence. Then he leaned forward, steepling his fingers, and regarded her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously scrutinized and seen. "Natasha," he said, "I don't expect you to understand everything tonight. But I want you to remember this. The world will always measure you against what you have been given, not what you have earned. And when they do, you must rise above it. You must make them see your strength." Natasha's mind whirled, processing both the sting of his earlier words and the weight of his current advice. She realized that her grandfather's challenge was never about money. It was about character, about resilience, about proving that she could command her own destiny. She sat up straighter, meeting his gaze with newfound resolve. "I understand, Grandpa," she said quietly but firmly. Victor's lips curved into a subtle smile, approving yet enigmatic. "Good, because inheritance is temporary. Legacy is forever. And you, Natasha, are just beginning to write yours." The hours slipped by as they spoke, the conversation weaving between strategy, ambition, and the unspoken truths of their family history. She left the study that night with her mind ablaze, not with anger, but with clarity. The college fund, the wealth, the scrutiny, all of it was a backdrop for a lesson she was only beginning to comprehend. She had the tools to build her own life, but it was up to her to wield them with purpose and intelligence. The next weeks were a crucible. Natasha returned to college with a renewed focus, each lecture, assignment, and late-night study session feeling like preparation for the battles she would one day face in the world her grandfather inhabited. She began networking strategically, approaching internships not for prestige, but for experience, honing her skills with meticulous attention to detail. The whispers of doubt from her peers, the subtle jabs about her family's wealth, only fueled her determination. Every time she felt uncertainty creep in, she recalled the gleam in Victor's eyes, the reminder that legacy was earned, not given. Slowly, her efforts began to compound. Projects she led gained recognition from professors. She developed a reputation for precision and innovation, and the respect she garnered was hard-won, distinct from any shadow her family name cast. Months later, at a gala celebrating student achievements, Natasha stood before a room filled with influential alumni, her heart racing as she received an award for her innovative research project. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, and for a fleeting moment she imagined her grandfather's expression, the mixture of pride and scrutiny. But this time she didn't feel small. She felt formidable. The college fund, the wealth, and the expectations had been catalysts, but the victory, her victory, was entirely hers. Victor approached afterward, his tailored suit impeccable, eyes gleaming with approval. "I see you've begun to write your legacy," he said quietly, his words carrying both challenge and praise. Natasha smiled, a sense of triumph mingling with gratitude. "Yes, Grandpa, and it's only the beginning." The morning air was crisp as Natasha stepped onto the balcony of her campus apartment, the city stretching beneath her in a tapestry of lights and movement. The memory of her grandfather's piercing gaze and the weight of his words still lingered in her mind, but this time it fueled a calm determination rather than insecurity. She had spent months building her network, refining her skills, and proving that she could thrive in spaces where wealth alone didn't grant respect. Today, she was attending a meeting with a venture capital firm, an opportunity that could define her early career, and she walked through the streets with her head high, each step resonating with purpose. Her phone buzzed, a message from her best friend reminding her of the luncheon afterward. But she didn't glance down. Her focus was absolute. Natasha had learned that timing, preparation, and poise were as valuable as any inheritance, and she intended to demonstrate it. Entering the sleek office, she was greeted by a receptionist who led her through corridors lined with modern art and glass-walled offices. The energy in the room was different from her grandfather's mansion, less theatrical, more precise. But the stakes felt no lower. She was ushered into a boardroom where 3 senior partners awaited, each exuding quiet authority. Natasha's palms were steady as she shook hands, her voice measured, and confident as she presented her project, a sustainable energy initiative designed to leverage small-scale urban solutions for communities. She spoke with clarity, addressing potential pitfalls and opportunities alike, illustrating her knowledge with data and case studies. The partners listened intently, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions, but Natasha handled each with the poise and intelligence that had been cultivated through months of rigorous preparation. There was a subtle tension in the room, the kind that accompanies moments when someone's skill challenges preconceived notions, and Natasha felt a thrill, not of fear, but of vindication. After 90 minutes of discussion, the meeting concluded with firm handshakes and genuine praise. "Natasha," one partner said, "your analysis and foresight are impressive. We're excited to support your initiative." The validation washed over her in waves, yet she reminded herself to remain composed. This was not about showing off. It was about proving her capability on her own terms. As she left the office, she felt a renewed sense of ownership over her life. The college fund, the inherited wealth, even the high expectations from her grandfather had been catalysts, but this moment was entirely hers. Natasha knew she was no longer defined by the advantages she had been given, but by the value she could create independently. Weeks passed, and Natasha's reputation grew. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived, and her innovative project gained traction in industry publications. She navigated the complex intersections of ambition, ethics, and opportunity with an instinct sharpened by both her upbringing and personal resolve. One evening, she received a call from her mother, breathless with excitement. "Natasha, your grandfather has asked to see you at the estate this weekend. He wants to discuss something important." Natasha paused, a ripple of anticipation threading through her chest. She sensed that the visit would be more than a formality. It was an acknowledgement of the distance she had traveled since that Thanksgiving dinner, a recognition of her evolution from a hesitant, self-conscious girl to a formidable young woman. The drive to the estate was filled with reflection. Natasha thought about every late night studying, every strategic decision she had made, every moment she had spent proving herself, not to defy her grandfather, but to confirm to herself that she could. Arriving at the estate, the gates loomed as they had months before, but this time they felt welcoming rather than intimidating. The familiar gravel crunched under the tires, a comforting, grounding sound. Victor Sterling was waiting, leaning casually against the pillars of the front entrance, impeccably dressed, his expression a mix of curiosity and respect. Natasha stepped out of the car and met his gaze. "Natasha," he said, his voice carrying that same velvet and steel timbre. "I've been watching. It seems the college fund has done more than finance your education. It's ignited something else." They walked through the halls together, the grand portraits and opulent decor now serving as markers of legacy rather than sources of intimidation. Victor gestured toward a study, inviting Natasha to sit. He regarded her for a long moment, measuring, considering, before speaking again. "I always wondered how you would navigate the expectations, the scrutiny, the weight of our family name. And you've surprised me." Natasha met his gaze evenly, the fire of accomplishment shining through. I learned that it wasn't just about money, Grandpa. It was about proving that I could create, lead, and succeed on my own terms. That lesson was yours to give, but that work was mine. Victor's eyes glimmered with something she hadn't expected. Pride, tempered with the recognition that Natasha had claimed her agency fully. The following months saw Natasha orchestrating a series of initiatives that combined her family's influence with her personal vision. She established a scholarship fund for students in underserved communities, leveraging the financial resources she had access to, but ensuring that the leadership and selection processes were driven by merit, innovation, and dedication. Her ventures in sustainable technology gained partnerships with major firms, earning her recognition not just for opportunity, but for tangible impact. Each success was a quiet rebellion against the notion that she was merely benefiting from inherited wealth. Each was a declaration that her intelligence, strategy, and resilience were forces in their own right. One evening, at a gala hosted in her honor, Natasha caught sight of Victor Sterling across the room. He approached, his presence as commanding as ever. Yet, there was a warmth in his expression now, a softness that had been absent in the early encounters. "You've built more than I anticipated," he said, voice low, sincere. "Not just wealth, not just influence, but respect. You've earned it." Natasha felt a deep swell of fulfillment not for the praise itself, but because it signified that the trials, the scrutiny, the subtle challenges he had placed before her had served their purpose, to transform her into someone who could command her own life. Over time, Natasha's empowerment extended beyond professional success. She navigated family dynamics with skill, establishing boundaries that earned respect without severing ties. She confronted her cousins who underestimated her, her voice calm yet authoritative, each conversation a masterclass in asserting intelligence and confidence without arrogance. She cultivated friendships and partnerships that amplified her mission rather than distracted from it. Every decision, every calculated risk, every thoughtful response became a testament to the power of agency, strategy, and vision. Years later, Natasha stood in the same grand hall where she had once felt the sting of her grandfather's pointed words. Now, she was the one setting the tone, guiding discussions with poise and clarity. Victor Sterling observed her, a small smile on his face, realizing that the young woman he had tested had not only met his expectations, but had exceeded them in ways even he had not foreseen. Natasha, once defined by inheritance, had become the architect of her own destiny, resilient, intelligent, and unyieldingly empowered. The college fund had been a beginning, but she had transformed it into a launching point for legacy, innovation, and personal triumph. The fire that had ignited in her chest on that Thanksgiving evening now burned with steady brilliance, illuminating a path not just for herself, but for all those she would inspire. And in that moment, standing tall in the mansion that had once felt overwhelming, Natasha realized she had done more than earn respect. She had claimed it, fully and irrevocably, on her own terms.